Today we're talking about dealing with rejection and frustration. And today, two of my good friends from academia are going to support me and talk about their interesting experiences today. One is Dr. Christina Bergmann, who's working at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics, where I also met her. And my friend, Dr. Molly Berenhaus, who did her PhD in Sussex, and she's a conference friend of mine, and we just grew close through the last years of our PhD when we struggled together and had a good Facebook friendship. So, as usual, if you have questions coming up during the session, you can use the YouTube window for the live chat, or you can tweet me to my Twitter account @phdial to ask questions to either of us. If you want your questions to be asked anonymously and we're not talking about your name, you can also send me a direct message. So, being able to deal properly with rejection and frustration is a key academic skill. I think there are a few jobs out there in the world where you have to deal with a comparable amount of negativity and frustration, especially as all the successes are so much delayed from when you actually put the work in. And the earlier you learn to deal with it, the better it will be for your future career, and it will make your life much easier. I think the most important part is to understand that this is just part of the job and it's nothing personal, and your experience is also nothing unique to you. Every one of us goes through this. And the best is just to deal with it and, and to learn from it and take as much constructive out from it as you can and as is possible, and just use it to improve your work. So it's also very useful to learn some survival strategies. So this is what we're talking about today. We start with part one, which is the first aid kit. Here we're talking about things you can do directly in a situation where you encounter negative feedback or any kind of rejection and frustration. And we start with the first part, which is dreaded emails. Christina is starting with the discussion. Go ahead.
Hi. So, yeah, nice that you're all here or watching this after we're done. So I was first thinking, okay, what kind of emails could you get that are frustrating or rejection? So the obvious two are, of course, rejections for jobs or grants. These are the big ones, but there are also these little stings sometimes, or sometimes big stings, when you get a direct email from someone who's, for example, read your paper, or is giving you feedback like, this is not going against with my pet theory. How can you publish this? Or even from a colleague saying some things that are hard to deal with. And usually the first thing that happens is that you open this email, and often the headline and the subject line is not really clear that this is going to be one of those bummers. Sometimes it's really just the reviews are in or something, or I wanted to talk to you. And so you read this and you get this shock. And then you either get mad or sad or angry or just frustrated. And this first reaction is completely normal. I think it's really important to acknowledge that these very emotional reactions are just how we deal with anything that's surprising us and that overwhelms us. But what happens next is important. Do you choose to reread these emails 5, 10, 20 times and spend the whole day on it? That's what I used to do. And that's not really helpful. Or do you find a different way? And what I usually do is try to not dig in, but to really get some distance between my emotional reaction and the actual content. And the key to that is just close the email, let it lie, and distract yourself. And you can distract yourself by going outside. It's really, really healthy to sometimes just go outside, or meet some friends, or even work on a fun project that makes you happier. But just do something different. And this way you create distance between this frustrating thing and yourself. And it's of course not always easy to completely let go. And if you can't completely let go, that's fine as well. But then at least you're not constantly rereading these emails and really fall into a hole. So that's my key strategy. And then once you're bit calmer, you feel you can come back to that, you can deal with the content. But the first thing you should do is actually not pick it apart right away.
I usually try to finish what I was currently working on first before I read these emails. So I see them flying in the corner of my eye, and I'm like, ooh, this is this email I've been waiting for a long time. Like, chances are equally high that this is a good response or a bad response. And I really force myself to finish what I was currently working on, to not get distracted from this. And then I read it. And usually the first thing I do is, when it's something which really upsets me, I just grab my gym bag and get out of the office.
Yeah, no, and when I first started kind of getting these emails, I would let it cloud my entire day, especially when it's papers that were from my PhD thesis. And basically, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to the PhD thesis seeming like an extension of yourself. And I'd let it ruin my day. And then recently, I kind of got a rejection on the same paper that I was so worried about, even though I know it's a better version and it was a different journal. And I was just like, you know what? It's going to be okay. And it sounds a lot easier said than done. And I feel like time is one of the big factors that ends up kind of improving that situation. But I just kind of like did also end up distracting myself. And then, yeah, it was good.
One thing I also sometimes do, especially when I get an editor email and the first sentence is not already congratulations or hey, very upbeat, then I just stop reading and I forward it to my co-authors, and then I just leave it and I wait until my co-authors respond first, so I get a pre-digested response already, and then I can look into the details.
Yeah, that can actually help. I recently got a rejection as well, but actually turned out that this was the journal's lingo for revise and resubmit. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, yeah, this co-author strategy can actually help you see things in a bit more nuanced way and actually see through some weird lingo. And the other thing I want to mention is that it might, depending on whether you're waiting for an email or not, might actually be a good strategy to limit when you get those emails. That's of course those productivity advices that you get again and again, that you shouldn't always check your email. And I'm not completely good with that, to be honest, but what I do is not have any push notifications on my phone. So I won't wake up to these kinds of emails, or I won't go to bed with these kinds of emails. So that already limits the times at which I can get this upset, and then there are other things around usually. So that's another. Well, it's more preventing, but it's still on the topic of emails.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next topic, or?
Yeah.
Okay, now we are talking about interpersonal conflicts. They are luring around every corner.
So thank you all for being here. This is very exciting. I've had some experience with interpersonal conflicts, and the kind of thing I want to stress is that I think of interpersonal conflicts as something so dynamic, and this idea that you can have conflicts interpersonally in this kind of specific academic setting with the PI of a project. And also there's the idea of you kind of thinking about your relationship to the project, research assistant, research associate, PhD student. And then there's also kind of co-workers that might be a little bit above you. As a research assistant, you might be the research assistant, and then they're the postdoc, and they've kind of been in the grant a while, as well as an interesting kind of set of people that cross that barrier. I have some people that I work with in a colleague mode and then decide to work with in a friend mode. And the nice thing about kind of thinking of relationships very specifically and trying to really decide, is this someone I really only interact with in a work setting, even if we get on very well, or if I also want to have a personal friendship with them, it allows you to kind of negotiate that kind of relationship. And something that I've kind of tried to do, and I'm not always amazing at it because I'm based in England, and I I do absolutely love England. And I'm from America, so it's quite interesting kind of cultural situation. But I noticed that people really do, out of politeness, rarely will say exactly what they're thinking, especially in a professional setting, unless you've known them for a while. And you can kind of, so you have to kind of learn this like other professional lingo. And yeah, I think it's just good without kind of being rude necessarily, especially like kind of think about the cultural context, to really just like actually be mindful. And if you do realize you want to collaborate with someone who's been a friend and someone you've just admired, to kind of say, I'd like to transition into this, and I'll make sure that we differentiate between when we're in friend mode and when we're in colleague mode. I have a specific friend I do this with. And as well as with bosses, I'm someone that if I'm kind of having a conflict, I'll take it very personally. And I have to realize, especially if it's a job, that I can be like, you know what? Everyone is going to have their bad days. And this was something really helped me. If I think of someone's reaction as more to do with them rather than me, obviously it's good to own up if you have done something wrong, if you think it's wrong, but to kind of also not just take everything personally, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This is also something which I always do. When there is a situation where I feel tension, or this is weird and feels unfair or like unfriendly to me, and something which I usually wouldn't expect from that colleague or from this person, is I also always try to just put myself in their shoes. And I just had so many occasions where I was the jerk, and where I was just in a rush and I didn't have time to listen, and I didn't really have time for this, and I had to say no to this person because there was no way I could just come up with the resources to help them now. And then I just have to say no, and sometimes I'm so stressed and so tired that I also don't say it in the way I should. And I know it's not personal, and it has nothing to do with this person, and just with my situation and how stressed I am. And just by understanding how often you are yourself in this situation helps much easier to digest this if somebody else is acting like this towards you.
Definitely. I definitely agree. Also, this is kind of really helpful if another kind of relationship is with people you meet at conferences. Mm-hmm. And so just kind of this idea that you meet someone at a conference and you think, and they're like in your field and they might be really high up. And then you kind of go in like, I'm going to contact them. I'm going to be proactive. And you might not hear back from them for a while. And then you might see them at another conference and they are really chatty. And it's just kind of realizing that some relationships that you build in academia might be slow to rise. And that's kind of okay, or fizzle. And yeah, so it's just really interesting.
Yeah. I think another thing which is really helpful in these situations when you are forced to work together and you don't really get out of the situation, is to really just focus on the goals and the mutual goals, and to see that instead of just focusing on this interpersonal conflict or feelings about the situation, is to really just focus, okay, what do I want from the situation? What is the minimum I want to get out with? And how do I make it easier for this other person, or like make it possible for them to deliver what I need from them? And also at the end of the day, you don't have to be friends with everybody. Even though you need to be able to work with most people, you don't have to be friends with them, and they don't need to be friends with you.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next exciting topic?
Yeah, I think it's actually a good transition. So the next topic is getting roasted in public. And this is going to happen to all of us. When you present your work on a conference, it's just so likely that somebody is not going to like it, and somebody has some kind of objections with it. And first, it's important to expect these situations because they're very likely to happen. But also just to be prepared. And one thing I always do when somebody grills me, especially in public, is I'm trying to listen very carefully to what they're saying. And then I'm trying to translate the message in order to reformulate it into constructive feedback. And I basically ask them, so what you're saying is, and then the nice digested version of what they just said. And this first buys me time to not get angry, and really focus on the content. And by this, I maintain control in the situation. And the worst which can happen in a situation where you get grilled in public is that you lose control of it, and then other people get over it, and you make yourself the victim of the situation. You want to avoid this at all costs. So buy yourself the time, don't get emotional, but just give a very professional response and just stick up with your work. It's totally fine to say, well, I did this project a year ago and now I would probably do it differently. And yes, this is a fair suggestion. And I would love to do this, but for reason A or B, this is probably not possible, or it would like exceed my resources and my time, and potentially I can do this in the future. Right now I can't. So thank you for this nice suggestion. But yeah, just still stand with your work and don't distance yourself from it too much. But also realize that in this situation, it's again not personal against you, but it's for your work. And even though some people express their concerns or ideas like a jerk, they often, after all, do have good intentions and want to make it better. And there's also this whole culture in academia that people who are extremely aggressive and mean also appear more intelligent or more superior and dominant. And sadly, there is actually some evidence that this is true, that we perceive people who are extremely aggressive as more competent. But realize that you still have to control the situation. This is your presentation and you should take it. And just take the useful message and get rid of the shit.
Yeah. Just to add to that, if you might have even experienced that from the audience point of view, and if someone is really derailing your talk with their question or is being really unprofessional, the audience will know.
Yeah.
And you won't look like the jerk, but they will. Yeah. So keep that in mind as well. The audience is usually quite rational.
This is very true.
And if you, I had once, I'm not going to give any names, but I had this one situation where I was an audience member, and my talk was referenced by a kind of big researcher in the field. And I did end up crying. It was one of like my first big talks, and it was like this international conference. And the thing is, even though I did end up feeling crummy, it actually ended up kind of I ended up building relationships out of it, because people pointed out, this is not your fault. Like, and I ended up, like learning a lot from the experience and reminding that there actually is warm solidarity in pockets of academia.
Yeah, this is very true. And often if somebody's really a jerk, it also means that they are really interested in your work. So maybe after your talk or during the question and answer session, you want to suggest them that you meet after the session for a coffee and talk about it, because you're genuinely interested in what they have to say, and it maybe doesn't have room in the question and answer session to fight about these things, but maybe you can do this just among the two of you later. And this also gives you a good control of the situation and takes all this aggressiveness out of the current situation and postpone it to later where it's much more relaxed. And you will find out this jerk might actually not be a jerk after all. All right, the next topic is something really, really sad. It's projects not working out. And this is also sadly something every academic has to deal with eventually.
Yes. And so I am an early kind of academic. I'm still working on the corrections for my thesis. So I'm like at this really interesting stage. And because of, I'm not 100%, I couldn't really pinpoint exactly why, I've always been really interested in building a network. And so it meant that there was a lot of kind of false starts. So I think it's really interesting to think of projects not working out in thinking of the various stages of the project. And obviously it will be more frustrating the farther along in the project you are. So you can maybe have an idea that kind of gets pinged about in a lab meeting. And then you might also have an idea that was actually discussed. There was a meeting kind of organized, and then if it's for something like kind of a meta-analysis, there might be a few people that are actually kind of starting that process. And then I think I'm not good enough with this, but rather than kind of just letting a project fizzle out, it might also be good to kind of let the project, like, acknowledge that this project is potentially not going to work out, rather than kind of ghosting. Because there is like a lot of, so ghosting is this idea of just kind of, oh, it's fizzled out, I haven't spoken to this person in a year, they're not going to care. Because that might actually still be on their project list, and they might just have not had time to allocate the time to it yet. So yeah, I need to be better at that, I think.
I personally find it always very, very difficult to really decide, is this just depending, like, does this project not work because I haven't tried something, or I missed something which I should have seen, or when it's actually time to get rid of the project or just give up because it's not going to work out. And I always find it very difficult to find the line. And so far, after being persistent for long enough, it always worked out at the end. So I actually never had a project which I had to discard entirely. Yeah, there are always these points where I think, should I give up? Does it make sense to continue trying? And yeah. So do you have good suggestions for this?
Ooh, okay. So I guess it is writing down. So I read this book called it is relevant, and I'll see if I can remember the name, and I'll come back to it if I can't. The art of stress-free productivity, getting things done. And I got so into it, and I kind of also tried not to implement everything. But one of the things that stuck with me is having this kind of like background project list where you just list everything on your plate. And then if you know it might be something that's just in the distant future, but you don't want to take it off the list, because you can kind of also, like, if something, I think that I would recommend not beating yourself up if you realize you kind of gotten a bit knee deep into a project and it's not actually your bag. Because I kind of sometimes, if I'm maybe not doing well and I decide, oh, I don't have enough projects on, let me get a new project. And then I realize, oh my gosh, that's actually not kind of something I'm that interested in. Don't be afraid to be honest. Obviously, yeah.
But what if projects you're really invested in and you really want to do this, and then you just realize, oh shit, like this design is not working out, or it's actually not possible to get this in a proper way designed so that the data analysis will be clean, and I will have to live with all these confounds, and can I actually still use the topic, or can I still use the idea for something?
That's a really good suggestion, because I think there is, like, intellectual property is something that's such a weird situation in academia. I'm not, because it's like there to share information that's unpublished, but it would obviously be an ethical no-no to steal someone's project. But at the same time, science kind of runs on people like piggybacking and building off of what everyone else has done. And yeah, no, I think that's good to not just think of, oh, just you have to like completely kill that project, but it could inspire something else.
Do we have something to add to this for now? No? I just wanted to quickly say that it might always be useful to get feedback. Like, is this really as stuck as I think, or am I running into a direction that's not useful? So like informal chats can work wonders sometimes. Okay, so this was the first aid kit for what to do in situations where you realize something's not working well, or where you might be directly confronted with problems and conflicts. And now we're getting to part 2 of today's sessions, which is long-term prevention and venting in the right way. So I think Christina starts with the first part of this, which is avoiding isolation.
Exactly. So, of course, it's super easy as an academic to really get lost in the work, sit in the office all day, have your lunch in front of your computer while your analyses run, because they're so exciting and you want to see the results. but then that means that you're alone with, both your successes and your frustrations. So I recommend socializing, and I just want to focus on socializing with people in the same situations, your colleagues from the same lab, from another lab. Of course, having people outside academia is also great, and if you find these magical unicorns that I hear exist, then hold on to them. But just to focus on colleagues, because they're actually going, as Francisca already said, they're going through the same stuff. They deal with the same frustrations. They know in many cases, and they might have different strategies. So you want to not avoid this. So because, of course, the first step to take is to be motivated to not just sit in front of your computer, but go out, because that feels like not being productive or procrastination, but it's really useful.
Yeah.
And there are different ways. I mean, it starts with just joint lunches, or talking about your projects. Getting also over something that I actually personally had in the back of my head, because it's the way academia works. It's getting over the idea that we're all in direct competition, which we are actually not. We're actually all in the same boat. Okay, we're competing in some abstract way for the 5 tenure positions that are out there, but it's really rare that we're actually really having to directly fight each other. No, and actually we can lift each other up and really work together. And so once you're over this whole socializing is a waste of time, and it's actually fraternizing with the enemy. Once you're over that mindset, that it actually becomes quite natural to hang out with people in the same situation. And even when you feel like you're competing, for example, when you're applying for the same grant, it's really good to actually have a colleague in the same situation. So a story that my colleague Sho and I always tell, so both of us have the blog Cocktails, look it up, is that we were both applying for the same grant in the same round. And we actually read each other's proposals a few times and gave each other feedback and got ideas from each other. And that led to us both getting this really cool grant in the same round. Okay, that might not have worked for other grants, but this one time actually having someone in the same boat was extremely productive and useful. And so we were in some way in competition, because there's only limited funds, but it ended up being really good to have a colleague around. And you don't have to compete in private life just because you're both even up for the same. That's another thing.
Yeah. I think actually Nicola asked a very interesting question, which fits really well, like how departments or institutions, how people deal with this there, and whether there are activities as groups, and whether there are already implemented ways for the department or institute which provide a platform to socialize more, talk about these things. And at the Max Planck Institute, I had a feeling that a lot of institutional things were already organized beforehand, and this was really nice. And there was always a group of people who was too busy with their projects and had too much work to do to actually do these things. And I think many of them regretted this at the end. I always tried to make it, and sometimes I was also too busy and had too much work to do and I couldn't make it. But at the end, these were actually the times where I really socialized and made useful network connections, and also talked to people and got help in problems where I would have otherwise spent weeks Googling around and looking for solutions, which were just there at my institute, and I just didn't know about it. And there was a nice person who could show me this, how to solve this problem within 2 minutes. And it's really important to use these things. Here at Penn, the situation is a bit different, because it's a much bigger institute and it's much less good connected. Also because we're not all in the same building and share the same structures and talks. But what the postdocs do here is they organize this themselves, and just via the self-organization of social hours and happy hour drinks and just going to all these things, just organizing talk series where there's free pizza. Free pizza gets people there. So this already created a very useful network, and I do have my social safety net via these structures. And even though it's counterintuitive when things go shit, to go to these kind of events, you actually don't want to talk because, yeah, you know, everybody else is successful at this really good institution and everybody else looks like they are the shining stars there, and they just struggle with the same shit as you do. And it's really smart to just talk about it and get engaged with them.
Yeah, no, I think the kind of idea of going to organized events, even if you might be coming kind of from a mindset where, oh, you know, I'm doing my own thing. Because I very much have been someone that kind of is like kind of creating like my own little path. But then when I came to Sussex, and there was always this thing called like Thirst Friday with kind of grad students. And it was always amazing. It made me feel like I was actually in that like kind of bubbly academic environment I thought was going to be there, and why I wanted to be at Sussex. And people getting excited and also expressing frustration. And you realize that it's not, it obviously is kind of, people treat it like an epidemic with kind of, what's it called, imposter syndrome. But actually, the idea of everyone being like, I don't think I belong here. And then you then see a couple years later, they have a big publication. It's like, look at that. Like, it kind of inspires you to work harder. And yeah, it's nice.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think if there are no implemented structures or opportunities at your institute, nothing should stop you from starting to organize this yourself. And don't only, like, of course you can do this with your friends or the people you already know, but don't be shy to just email the entire list via secretary or something, and just get in touch with other researchers, because there are just as many people sitting as isolated and worried and alone in their offices, glued to their desk, not knowing what to do with all their problems and where to find help. And they might be very happy to just reach out to you. And this will take a while to implement until you actually have a group who is carrying this by themselves. But it's totally worth the investment. Yeah? Okay, then we're getting to a very connected and very important point, which is social safety nets.
Yes. So this kind of maps on to the avoiding isolation. And I've kind of really been thinking a lot about social safety net, because you can kind of think of maybe your friends from back home, wherever that might be, as the kind of start of the social safety net. And then when you kind of get into your kind of starting with the PhD environment, the kind of friendships that just seem like, oh, this is this person I can now go for drinks with, or this is that person that I can play D&D with, and they're also kind of doing this PhD with me. It might seem non-consequential, but then those are the people that, now that you kind of have a rapport, that if you're really struggling, and it might be something that is directly related to what you're doing, your relationship with your supervisor, your project not working, or something that you're actually having a personal incident and you want to know how to approach HR about it, then these will be like your lifeline. And something kind of really important in building the safety net is it's kind of difficult to define exactly, but kind of making the decision to stay away from negative people. And a negative person isn't necessarily just this one person who is now deemed the villain, but a person who, you know, obviously if someone is going through a tough time and they have kind of ended up becoming negative, I don't necessarily recommend just pushing the door, you know, especially if they're a very good friend. Because I could even admit I've been a negative person at times. But just kind of deciding, you know what, I will maybe set aside time, try to go for a coffee with them, but then also decide, you know what, on a day-to-day basis, I will, you know, maybe go, if I see a message from them, wait a little bit before responding or something like that. Like, and this, you might also find negative people being your you know, like the head of the study you're working on. And obviously you can't not communicate with the PI, like, but it's deciding to, if they're going to invite you out for drinks and you feel that if you don't go, you're going to lose your job, you're not going to lose your job. Like you can make up a firm excuse being like, actually, I have a family get together I have to be going to. You know, they might believe it, they might not. As long as you sound just kind of assertive and not aggressive or passive aggressive, you know, like I think there's something fine with that. It's like deciding not in a cocky way to like put yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone have anything to add about social safety net?
I have one thing which I only understand now a bit better, but when I was in a situation, I actually did not really understand it. And this was during my PhD. There was a whole group of PhD students, and many of them were very disillusioned. It was really hard to just keep my motivation going because everybody was just stuck in this circle of negativity. And even though they were not necessarily complaining about the situation that much or like were generally negative, like just all these small little cynical and bitter remarks about the situation of academia and our job prospects and everything was really pulling me down quite a bit. And it took me quite some effort to pick out some people when I was actually feeling down that I was not going to other people who would also be negative or disillusioned about the situation, but who were actually upbeat, and to talk about people like there was this young postdoc in our lab, and she's still amazing, and she was just always so motivated, and she said like, yeah, it is hard, it is a shark tank, and life is not easy, and it's hard to survive, and your prospects are not great, but then there are also just people who make it, and look, it's just fun, and you don't do this, and just keep your options open and have multiple options, but just don't get too desperate about something. And this was extremely helpful just to have this one person who was taking this all with a pinch of salt. And yeah, academics tend to be very cynical, sarcastic people. And this is all funny and can feel soothing. But if all of this negativity and these jokes about how shitty life and the situation is, if this is all you constantly encounter, it's really hard to find strategies or ways to deal with it in a way so that you can take something positive out of it. And yeah, I think this is also really important to realize eventually, that even though it's funny to make jokes about how bad our job prospects are and how idealistic we all are, and that there's nothing else to get from this job, yeah, there are also some people who make it, and some people who don't end up being poor adjunct professors teaching all the time or being unemployed.
Yeah, I think the point you're making about intentionally deciding who you're going to speak to, because I remember this was more like kind of when I was younger, but it also was like during my PhD where I felt, you know, I knew I needed to get out and I needed to see someone, and I didn't care who. I was going to contact a group of people that I know I like, and I wasn't really thinking about what actually was going on in their life. If they could actually deal with someone who was maybe going through a bit of like a depressive kind of time, or like it just kind of, it also means that you're kind of respecting the other person as well. Like obviously everyone's going to make mistakes, and crossing that fine line is very difficult. And I can be the first one to admit it, but like at least trying a little bit, like.
Yeah. And I think it's just also good to pick a mentor who is not necessarily related to your projects. Like having somebody who's maybe a bit up the ladder compared to you, somebody you can talk to about problems or career decisions or how to take things, who is not involved and invested in your projects and doesn't really care about the outcome of individual projects and can provide a little bit more distance to individual situations. I think it's always good to have one person like this to go to, just to get a bit of a broader perspective on what really matters and what doesn't. So yeah, and I think this also is a good transition to the next part, which is learning how to digest critique and make the most out of it. And I give the word to Christina.
Yeah. So let me just go back to these emails that we started with, because I think that's a very, very salient example of critique that you have to digest. often, and as we said before, often there's something in there. There's some useful feedback in there, even though it might feel mean because this feedback or rejection or actually revisions, feel like they're personal because they're dealing with a project that you've invested a lot of time in. But actually, that means people have actually really read or thought about your project or read your paper, and they've invested already, and so they actually, at least on some level, and in most cases, maybe not in all cases, but in most cases, want you to succeed. So they give you maybe their 2 cents, and maybe those are packaged in a way that you don't really like, but it's a good basic assumption about the other one that they're trying to be constructive in whatever way. And I think that's already really helping, trying to assume that there's something in there, and that might just be hard to get out. So can you extract the core message, or can you extract parts of that email or that review that are actually leading you somewhere? And then can you also try to strip away, for example, cultural differences? I really like this idea about cultural differences because the Max Planck Institute is in the Netherlands, and the Dutch are infamously direct to a point where it really hurts and bleeds. But that has nothing to do with you and has nothing to do with their judgment of your project. It's really just their way of wording the same thing that a British person might package wonderfully in a way that doesn't actually sound like critique. You might think you're doing awesomely with the very same point. Another thing is, yes.
Christina actually had on her own blog Cocktails an excellent contributions regarding international and intercultural critique. And if you go down to the links, I put a link to her blog there. And if you're interested in reading up on this, please go on the website and follow the blog Cocktails, a brutally honest academic blog about problems we're also discussing here often. So check that out.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I did think about this critical, this tone debate actually that was going or is still going on in psychology a lot, and that was my personal response with a wonderful illustration of a German potato and a Japanese rice roll trying to talk to each other. So, but just to get back to the point, another thing is that even though, for example, a grant rejection might not always come with reviews, sometimes you can ask for them, and that is actually in the long run the better strategy. So I just want to, really, really hammer that home, that reviews can help you. I think there are even studies on the more rounds of reviews your paper's gone through, the more likely it is to be accepted and cited even. I should look that up and maybe put it in the links. The other thing is that, okay, sometimes it might just be something mean. And sometimes this email really just says, you're stupid. And then it's important to find the point where you don't waste time on that, because you really have to distinguish between yourself and protect yourself and your project, which needs change and improvement, because no project is perfect. Even Einstein is still being revised. So don't worry about not being perfect. That's normal as a project. Sometimes it's just hard to find this line, and that's where your colleagues come in again. Sometimes just give this email or tell a story of something someone said, and then hear what someone else who can maybe more easily put themselves in the shoes of the person giving you this critique. See what they have to say. Maybe they can either find where they're coming from, or they can confirm that, no, this is really not constructive. Just let it go and forget about it and move on.
Yeah, great strategy. I also sometimes do this with myself, that I just skim the review very briefly for the core message, and then I just summarize the main critique points, and then I just leave this whole thing. Like I'm never reading the review again until I'm done with the main critique points and revising. And then I often go through this and it's like, oh, well, this is just very harsh comments about one and the same things from 3 different reviewers, and it feels like 3 pages of shit, but basically they just make 1 or 2 points.
Yep.
So
yeah, and then also it's just kind of this idea, like, so first, before I forget, there's this kind of, in terms of getting kind of critique, I think also I found this really helpful to get feedback on an unsuccessful job interview in academia. And not for kind of everyone, but there was one job where it was a very tight application kind of window, 2 weeks. And I know that sometimes it might mean there's an internal, but it wasn't, I don't know, who knows. But okay, basically that's irrelevant. But it was kind of like I ended up having some stuff happen that I wasn't expecting, and the job application just, I tried so hard because it was like a really good situation, this job. And I ended up getting really upset when I didn't get it. But then when I got feedback, which I eventually got, it was really helpful. I was like, oh, there were some shit things, like, and I can improve upon that. Like, yeah, just the iterative process. And then, and I also completely agree with like making sure because you kind of sometimes feel like, oh, if I'm going to be a good academic, I need to read this entire review. And sometimes it's a rejection on a paper. And so you don't really need to know exactly why the paper was rejected if it's not revise and resubmit. And like, I think skimming it, because we have kind of a skill that I think I've developed from being in academia, is skimming like very like kind of intentionally, and kind of actually getting important stuff out from a skim.
Yeah. Not boiling in negativity, and maybe also not internalizing the negative message, but the constructive feedback, which is hidden between this, is maybe also good. Like, try to forget the mean way it was expressed, but try to remember, oh, well, maybe I have to unpack my complicated sentences better, or, well, this person really didn't get it, so probably I have to do a better job at explaining it. And I have to work on this. And this is something you can actually actively incorporate and work on. This is not something, oh, you're a shit writer, but this is something you can actually, it's manageable. Preparing like how to explain things better is something you can actually do. But, well, it's very unconstructive just to realize that you're a shit writer, but this is not going to work out. Do you have more points, Christina?
These were the main points. I think it's, really important to try and decode the message, but sometimes you just need help doing that.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, the next point is get a fucking hobby and your life together. And Molly is going to talk about this.
I really this is something that's been super important to me, because I've kind of always had a hobby. The thing I kind of considered myself was like a musical theater performer. But there's kind of one thing with knowing you are potentially like all right at something. Look, see, still self-deprecating. And actually deciding, you know what, this makes me happy and I am going to do it on a regular basis. So something that I think can be quite helpful is not necessarily kind of, throwing away loads of money for it, but if there is a way, if it is something kind of that is a community-based hobby, like I go to a jazz club and I sing, and I've kind of, sometimes I say I'm going to go and I don't go, but if I kind of force myself to go, at least like once a month or once every other month, then I've actually kind of been developing a community with it. It almost feels like I have this kind of like hidden life where I'm doing this thing and I'm someone that I love being, but then I can also still go back and do what I love with kind of the science as well. And so I think another way is also realizing you might have kind of some dorky hobbies that don't come into the surface with other people in your cohort. And a really kind of fun example that kind of ran rampant in my department was Dungeons and Dragons. And, and the funny thing was all of us kind of were like, are we going to take that step? We're doing a PhD. We've identified ourselves as dorks. Do we do it? And it's been something that's really like created some strong friendships and networks. And and it just, then there's this whole other language, because there's just, there's like a manual and some people get really into it and other people are just kind of coming every week and doing it. And I think that's actually like a pretty cool thing. And things like choirs and finding that you can do a hobby completely unrelated with other people in your department, I think is really nice.
Yeah.
interpersonally effective thing to do.
Yeah, I have the feeling this topic of like, make sure you actually have a life and you have a hobby. I think this is coming up in pretty much every academic crisis line session, but this is so true. And this is such an important point, and so many people just neglect this because we are so easily drawn into thinking like, this is our project, this is the project I picked, this is the project I'm pleading for, and this is really my life, and I invest my entire life, and you are investing like 3 to 5 fucking years into a PhD, which sounds insane, and it partially is, but it's also just the case that it's very important just to still stay a person, and that it's totally okay to still have a normal life. And it's not only okay, it's also just really, really crucial in order to stay sane and be able to deal with everything this long-term frustrating project entails. And yeah.
And yeah, kind of to add on to that, there's this idea. It's kind of I'm really happy to see that people are talking about it, like in the media as well as in circles, about the mental health crisis in kind of specifically PhD students, but then academia as a whole. And it's this idea that kind of, you know, even whether you're prone, you know, genetically or whatever to kind of mental health issues or not, the likelihood that you will experience, you know, an anxiety attack, maybe like a short bout of depression, is very high compared to kind of the non-PhD cohort. And I think that really kind of helps to emphasize the importance of kind of getting your life outside of academia kind of in a nice way and building a routine. And this doesn't necessarily have to be kind of finding the one true love, although that does kind of help having a partner. I have one, so I'm kind of, yeah, but I kind of, you know, if other people, if that's not their thing, you know, they might have a good friend network, and it's just like, yeah.
Christina is back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is actually also a really good transition to the next topic, because they're really interconnected. And this is channel frustration and let it out in the right way. And one of the smartest decisions I've ever done during my PhD was to start boxing. This is something I wanted to do my entire life, and I never did it for reasons because people said, this is nothing for girls and you shouldn't do this. But after the second year of my PhD, I started boxing in my late 20s, and I fucking love it. And it's so great. And every time I'm opening one of these emails and it's shit, I'm just grabbing my gym bag, I'm going to the gym, I'm punching a bag for an hour, and imagine the face of this reviewer on the bag. And it's so deliberating. It's like a violent form of meditation. I realized that this is not the thing everybody should do, or which helps everybody, but like if it's meditation and relaxation, or drinking and going out with friends, or really just literally channeling your anger and let it out, whatever helps you to not internalize it and direct all this frustration internally against yourself, this is just going to bring you down and make you badder, make you worse. This is not going to help you at all. You have to let it out, but you have to let it out controlled. And whatever works for you, do it. And the only thing you really shouldn't do is gossip and rant in public. This is a very dangerous thing to do. Don't post rants about editors and journals or colleagues or supervisors on social media. This has no place there. There is a place to let things out. Social media or public circles or conferences are not a place to do this. You can do this in a very safe setting with academics you trust and who are your friends. These are typically not all your colleagues and not a group meeting. This can be also dangerous, depending on how large and trustworthy your group is. But yeah, like just make sure that you have a few people where you can actually vent your frustration and anger, but do this in a very safe setting, and don't ever let it out uncontrolled in a public setting or where you can't delete it or take it back. This is something really dangerous, which might actually be the end of your career. And like, if anything, like in the best case scenario, it's not going to work against you, but it's never ever going to help you.
Yes. Yeah. Like, because the thing is that whether so I'm not 100% sure how kind of many people out there are going to have a problem with someone in their kind of circle that ends up being a significant problem, and you need to kind of, cut ties or just drastically change the relationship. But I actually had like a mentor that was like, do be careful at conferences, because people are putting on a very friendly face at conferences, and it does feel safe, and there are aspects of it that are safe because you're with people in your research area. But in terms of kind of airing dirty laundry, it is not the place. And same with kind of social media, just kind of deciding, like in terms of privacy settings, which I know are kind of an iffy thing, or just also like kind of making this decision that on Facebook, on Twitter, that is not where I'm going to complain about a colleague, because you have no idea what's going on in that person's life. You have no idea how big their circle is. And it's just kind of disrespectful. Like, yeah.
But not only this, it's also like sometimes you, in poster sessions or something, you tend to be talking very open also about limitations of your project, or for which theories this can be used and for which it might not be too useful. And if you're talking to a very powerful person in your field, this might backfire badly. And I actually know of a case where a very open discussion at a poster session has led to a paper being rejected at so many journals, just because this person the field is so small, and this person is always one of the reviewers and had make this his personal mission to make sure that this body of theory is not going to be published. So yeah, this is not necessarily something smart, and you have to be careful what you say in public and with whom you can be honest and with whom not. Yeah. Christina, do you have something to add?
No, I had something for the boxing part, though. Not for the gossiping part. I really like this. I really like that you're doing this, and I think doing a PhD or being a postdoc is actually a great time to try something new. Something you might always have wanted to try, be it singing loudly in the car, or going to karaoke, or really becoming a jazz singer, as some people, or just painting and throwing paint at a blank canvas. That can all be really, really good ways to vent, and way better than attacking people personally, which is never a good look, because as was said, there might be something going on in their life, or you might just really shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I actually know a lot of people who started new things, especially during their PhD. It's like this prolonged adolescence where you have so much freedom to do new things. And many academics started running marathons. And I think this is also a great way to just get rid of the anger and the energy and just get it out. I did this for a while as well until I developed injuries from it, because I'm not necessarily made for running. So this is when I started looking into different options, and I started learning skateboarding and boxing. But yeah, I know a lot of people who also started funny other side projects, like doing an entire education as a furniture designer on the weekends. This prevents you from working too hard on the weekends and getting too frustrated and sucked up in things. And it also might provide you like a B plan in case plan A doesn't work out.
Yeah, and I think another really interesting thing about picking the hobby is I kind of found that it was hobbies that I either like did a little bit of when I was like a kid, and it felt really nice to like be like, I'm gonna get back in touch with that Molly, or like, that like, that version of yourself. Because I like did, from doing like a lot of theater, I started with doing a lot of dance, and I always was like, oh, my strong suits are gonna be acting and singing. And then I realized that like I actually do also really enjoy dance. So I got back into like ballet, and it's been a really kind of almost counterintuitively way to kind of get out the stress, because rather than focusing on kind of what's in my head, I'm focusing on how my like, not like just how I'm kind of like moving my body and like doing all this like footwork. And I now find I can do that footwork when I'm just by myself feeling stressed, and it helps so much.
I have exactly the same during boxing. When you're in the ring and you're sparring with somebody, you have to focus so much on not getting punched in the face, that you don't have any room left to worry about things. Like, you're there in the moment, you only have this going on. And I sometimes, because of this, call this a violent form of meditation, because this is exactly what it is. You have no room in your mind to focus on anything else. You're just super focused for an hour. And after this, you just go home, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're happy, and you just feel so zen. And you have the feeling you can take on the world if you have to. You can deal with this.
Yeah, and you're also kind of forcing yourself to be in the present. And it's like, oh, wait, it's not that bad. Like, you know, the world around you might, like, there might be a lot of things in the very, like, external world, but, which is always going, I mean, this is just my thought, like, it's always going to be the case. There's going to be something going on bad somewhere.
Yeah.
But if you can just focus on the present and also kind of, like, realizing the important people around you, it just kind of is like, it's going to be okay. Like,
yeah. So maybe this also brings us to the next to last topic today, and this is learning to stand up for yourself.
Yes. So I'm going to be talking about that. And self-confidence is actually something that I've really struggled with throughout my PhD, and I'm probably, like, kind of throughout different, like, kind of times in my life. And learning to be assertive, learning to kind of communicate, and also learning to not be embarrassed with having a therapist or a counselor has been essential for me being able to do this PhD. Because I kind of, it's almost like a bit of a pet peeve, but I can kind of understand it as well when people say, you know, my such and such, my mother, my father, my best friend is my therapist. That's quite far from the truth in terms of a trained counselor or therapist, because the role of that person is to be outside of your life, all aspects of your life. And the idea that you are, you know, whether it's NHS, so you get kind of your 6 free sessions, or it's kind of a low pay kind of service, or, you know, what have you, you are paying them for a service. And that means that you can also kind of think of it as, if you realize after a session or two you're not comfortable with that person, because that is very often the case, then you can decide, you know what, I'm going to find someone else that's going to take my money. And then you might end up building, I'm not embarrassed to say, I've, like, built over 2 years a strong relationship with the same therapist, and it has been amazing. Like, yeah. And it just really helped me stand up for myself, because the idea is that when you build a relationship with someone, like, kind of outside of your life like that, then that it kind of resonates with other elements of your life. And it's not usually that straightforward or kind of that, like, kind of nice rise. There'll be, like, that kind of learning hubbub stuff. But, like, yeah, that's just kind of really been a massive tip for me, as well as, you know, sometimes you're not going to be able to see your therapist, or they're away, or you're busy. It's just also kind of remembering that you are in charge of your life, like, and kind of realizing that whilst you might feel like a part of you has been so rejected and is so kind of broken from, you know, having problems with that chapter of your thesis, even, you know, the first submission of your kind of, like, dissertation or something like that not going well. I mean, it can be heartbreaking, but it's remembering that that's just one bit of your life. Like, and that, like, people, especially the people I've met at Sussex and academia in general, rock. Like, so many people in this kind of early career stage have so many awesome things. And it's like reminding yourself that you are awesome. Like,
during the toughest time of my PhD, where I really struggled with many worries, there was one particular helpful situation, and this is the situation where I realized that I don't need this PhD in order to have a happy and fulfilled life. That my future happiness does not depend on succeeding with this, and that I do have a plan B, and that there are options and things I can do, and I can be equally happy with another career. And as much as I love this, if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. And just defining what my minimal goals and requirements are in order to be happy. And one of these requirements was also just a financial one. if I'm not able to survive on a budget university or academia has to offer me, and I have to struggle too much with not being able to afford moving, or having to take too many loans because I have to struggle being unemployed for a few months, and just these sorts of things. And like in this situation, I just knew, okay, my minimal requirements are, one of them is money, and one of them is also being able to work in the area of research where I'm interested in. And if the jobs or the world doesn't have this to offer, then I'm doing something else. And just knowing this, and knowing that I will find a way otherwise in case it doesn't work out, this gave me so much strength to really negotiate that I have the minimal requirements in order to be happy and in order to be working and professional. And also just in interpersonal conflicts with like bosses and supervisors, just to stand up for these things. And also I knew the worst case scenario, like if they can't offer this to me, it's like, okay, fuck it, I'm out. This is it. And just being prepared for the situation, and that this is not a devastating moment, but this is just the worst case scenario, or like an option, one of multiple options. And this gives you a lot of backup strength to stand up for these things and actually get what you want.
Definitely, because if you kind of act like and feel like this is your only option, and you literally have nothing else if this doesn't go right, that's a lot of pressure. Like I've been there and felt like that. And I have friends and colleagues that have been there and have felt like that. And it is such a scary place to be. And if you do feel like that, realize that there are people kind of like us that have gotten through that stage. And it's kind of okay to at some point feel like that. But I think it is such a healthy and kind of mature thing to realize that there's more than academia and just whatever job you have. And also, like, I completely agree about like kind of deciding in terms of making sure that you can actually literally survive, have a head, have a roof over your head, and kind of be able to eat and survive. And also just kind of really just think about what for yourself, it's going to be the budget that you require is going to be different for everyone. And it's just kind of like being like, you know what, this does work for me, or this definitely doesn't work for me. And yeah.
Yeah, I want to add that. Yeah, it's really, really important to know what you're worth, and that you've come so far just to be at this point. Don't ever underestimate how far you've already come at whatever stage you're at. Like, just making it to the point where you can accept a PhD position is already not very common. It's quite extraordinary already. And you've probably been going through some tough times already. So just knowing that you're already, have worth and have achieved something is really, really helpful, because you're not standing in a hole, and you are not nothing, and so you are worth something. And the other thing that's really important to keep in mind, especially since we're here, 3 women talking about standing up for ourselves, pushing back is not necessarily a bad thing. And even if someone says, oh, she's such a bitch, or oh, she's always so aggressive, that's them being sexist and not you doing something wrong.
Yes.
And it's really, we censor ourselves, and we censor our pushbacks in so many little ways. And it's really important to keep in mind that this is something that we've actually been raised to do, and it's actually not the right thing to do, and it's also making us smaller than we are. So just don't be afraid to assert your worth, and just be this assertive person.
Yeah. And we're coming now to the last point of today's session, and we're going to end on an upbeat note. We're talking about happy endings.
Yeah, I signed up for talking about this because there are also good things in academia. There are successes, and we really, really like to delve into the rejection and frustration part. We really like to pick apart these mean reviews, and it often feels very personal. But there are also successes, and somehow those are so far removed from your effort and from your sometimes from this hopeful point at which you started a project, that they don't feel like a success, but they are, and it's really important to celebrate them, because they're just the same thing, just as the rejection, just flipped. So it's really fair to celebrate something as well, and really, yeah, assert that you've achieved that and you've worked for this. So it's yeah, really keep that in mind. And there are big things, of course, like this paper that you've revised 5 times and it's finally accepted. Let's just take a moment to reflect on yeah, how much work you've put into this, and how great it is that this is now out there. But there are also small things like having a great meeting, or giving a lab presentation, or even being asked to present, which all means that people care about your science. But these are good things, and they also help you actually find out what people appreciate about you, and what the things you're good at are. So really just listening to the positive things also means that you're paying attention to the feedback you get, not just the negative, but also the positive feedback. And that just makes us all better researchers, actually, if we're able to take both the good and the bad. Checking my notes, but I think that's it. And yeah, just really try to also smile sometimes.
Yeah. One of the PhD students in my old lab at the Max Planck Institute tried to implement a sort of like item on the agenda for each lab meeting, which was dedicated to celebrating successes. And somehow this never really hit it off, but I actually liked the idea, and I thought it's a great idea. And his idea was that every time we have something to celebrate, like a paper accepted, or a great talk, or we had a great conference, that we have 5 minutes at the beginning of the lab meeting where we just talk about the paper and present the results, and nobody is asked to criticize or ask questions about it. It's just about getting the applause from your colleagues and your direct peers. And I really, really like this practice. And sadly, it just didn't really work out because we were too busy doing other things. But yeah,
we actually do that in our lab meetings here in the new department. We have yeah, we ask, like, in the beginning of our lab meeting each week, are there any successes? We also ask, are there any failures? Are you stuck somewhere? We're also trying to yeah, especially if the seniors talk about the rejected papers that otherwise the PhD students never hear about. But no, it works really well, and actually it naturally came to be this. So what was the paper about? Oh, that's really interesting. So you give this very short summary. Yeah, I was lucky enough to have to go through one of those very short impromptu presentations. It might lead to you being asked to present the whole thing. That's the danger. Yeah. But it really gives you more appreciation for the work. It's a really great practice that, if possible, I really like and I really enjoy having implemented in my lab.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry.
You can go ahead.
Okay, cool. Okay, so at Sussex, there's like a couple of really nice things. So one of them, and I absolutely loved it. It was like the first thing I got really excited about at starting my PhD, was this bulletin board that basically for all PhD students, whatever authorship they got, it's like it's the first page of that article, and it's like to be like, look at these. And I got like a publication from something I did in my undergrad. So I was like it happened to be the only publication I had throughout, but it was still like, look at me. Like, it was like a great reminder, like even when I was really stressed, that, you know what, I am pretty cool. Yeah. And then also at like Vivas, because this was always kind of like this thing where you'd want to find out what happened so that you could prepare for your own Viva. So there's this little cute little room where there was always going to be those drinks for right after the Viva. And it meant that when I finally so that's the British defense basically, when I had mine, I knew that I was going to come into that type of thing. And something that really was amazing was that I kind of, my Viva was like first thing in the morning. And I decided before, I was like, if I actually manage to succeed at this, that I can do anything. That was kind of the kind of mindset I took. And then when they actually said, you know, Dr. Berenhaus, and you know, you just have to do these corrections, I actually jumped for joy and squealed. And so and then when I finally like kind of came down, I was like, okay, now I can do anything. Okay. And like, it didn't make me cocky. It just made me like feel like, yes, yeah, yeah.
I personally must admit I'm really, really bad at celebrating successes, or at least my own. It's just like every time these things happen, this is already so removed from the actual work I put in that I'm just so glad that it's off my desk and I don't really care about the success anymore. And every time one of my colleagues picks up on this and it's like, we have to go celebrate this, we have to, and this is great. And then it always feels so good. And I just realized that I don't really have the energy to pull myself up to celebrate my own successes so much. But I do have the energy to celebrate other people's successes. So in our lab, we just like unconsciously developed this, that we are pushing for celebrating other people's successes, and we help this way each other to really enjoy and embrace the positive moments better. And this really contributes to a very good lab culture. And I have this resolution for myself that I really pay attention that my colleagues don't get stuck in this, oh, everything is not really working well and I just have to work hard and I can't really embrace and enjoy my successes anymore. So I think we are at the end of today's session. This is the longest academic crisis line session we always had. But I think it's really interesting, and I'm happy that I was holding up the thing so you can scroll through the individual topics. The next academic crisis line session will be on January 9th. Topic is still up for votes. The link for the voting is here down and in the comments or in the information. There's also more information about my lovely colleagues who joined the discussion today, and you can visit their website, find out more about their research, or also contact them if you want to talk about things. You can also write me emails to address personal things or suggest new topics. Otherwise, I'm going to see you in the new year. I wish everybody a wonderful holiday break. Don't work too hard. Also enjoy a bit, and see you in the new year. And thank you, ladies, for joining me today.
Thank
this
you.
was very, very lovely.
Yeah.
Bye.